I am sure you will find this part of my castle more inviting. I hope you will find this comfortable. I didn't know, but that you might be hungry.
Don't worry guys, everything that I learned about being a good host, I learned from watching Dracula. And using the DVD scene selection, we are back with my scene-by-scene review of that wonderful movie.
Tonight, we are on Chapter 5, Renfield's Room.
In this scene, the real estate agent Mr. Renfield is securing the deal for Count Dracula to buy Carfax Abbey in England, while Count Dracula is acting as host and making Renfield feel comfortable, all the while planning to drink his blood. Dracula drugs Renfield's wine, and Renfield passes out. At first, Dracula's brides come in to bite him, but Dracula sends them away. Renfield's blood will only be his.
The scene takes place in one of the bedrooms inside of Dracula's castle, and it is another spectacular set. In the previous scene, Dracula was filmed high on the staircase looking more imposing, and Renfield was lower looking more vulnerable. Now in this scene, they're on the same physical level and are more often in the same shot. So you get to see the two best actors in the movie interact with each other, and the suspense grows into this incredibly atmospheric payoff. It's not just about survival. Dracula is an evil character who's luring Renfield to drink the drugged wine by being a charming host, all the while relishing the thought of drinking his blood. And Renfield is an English real estate agent who's getting spooked, but has to graciously accept his client's hospitality. So it's an interesting dynamic that's from the book, and it's so well written, where Bela Lugosi makes the most polite and normal lines sound terrifying.
I trust you have kept your coming here a secret.
I've followed your instructions implicitly.
Excellent, Mr. Renfield, excellent. And now, if you're not too fatigued, I would like to discuss the lease on Carfax Abbey. According to the Cinemassacre's website, this is where the cliche of villains saying excellent comes from. And there's a reason for the cliche. Most of the other words that mean extreme satisfaction, like marvelous, fantastic, fabulous, all have that A happy sound. I mean, no one sounds mean saying fabulous. Whereas excellent has that more based E that sounds like evil. And Bela just knew how to give every single word the right inflections and right emphasis so that it sounds like the essence of sophisticated menace.
You've chartered a ship to take us to England. We will be leaving tomorrow evening.
Everything will be ready. Tomorrow evening is such a simple and inoffensive phrase, but Bela makes it sound so ominous and foreboding, as if tomorrow evening will bring your worst nightmare. And as near as I could tell from my research, these are the first words that Bela ever said in character to another person.
While the Broadway producer Horace Liveright was casting Dracula, he met his friend, the director Gene D. Williams, for drinks at the Harvard Club. And Williams had seen Bela Lugosi in villainous roles in the Broadway plays Open House and The Devil and the Cheese, and recommended him to play Count Dracula, and Horace Liveright cast him. During the early rehearsals, though, Bela was just kind of saying his lines and not acting. The only time he showed any emotion was when he reprimanded another actor for not saying his cues right or for missing an entrance. Years later, Marlon Brando, whom Bela thought was a wonderful actor, would do something similar, where he'd mumble at first, all the while figuring out his character. But they didn't know what Bela was doing. And a week before the dress rehearsal, The play's director, Ira Hards, suggested that Horace Liverite have a talk with Bela. Liverite told him that he wasn't showing any emotion or feeling in his performance, and that the success of the whole play depended on him. And Bela replied, "Mr. Liverite, I understand your concern, but the performance is not until a week from tomorrow evening." Bela leaned over, towering over Liverite. "Now we work for position. Our lines must be perfect. Yes, we save the atmosphere for a week from tomorrow evening." That's when Horace Liverite knew he made the right choice, and saw how scary Bela Lugosi could be.
I hope I brought enough labels for your luggage. I'm taking with me only 3 boxes. This is very old wine. I hope you will like it. Aren't you drinking? I never drink wine. I love how it's 1931, Dracula's at its scariest, but these lines are still having fun with the character. Even when Dracula was on Broadway, they used to have nurses in the lobby with smelling salt in case someone fainted, and outside of the theater there was a hearse with a coffin. It was fun to go see Dracula. And as spooky as he is, Bela Lugosi had excellent comic timing. Just watch him in Son of Frankenstein. So he knows, again, how to give that right pause where it's funny, but still sinister and true to the character. These lines come from his arrogance, this pathetic human isn't going to figure it out. And they come from his sadistic joy of toying with his prey. Dracula likes spinning his evil web. Years later, he would have similar double-meaning lines when he reprised his role of Dracula in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Ah, young people, making the most of life while it lasts.
I think that's part of why he steals the show there. He's able to have a funny moment with Lou Costello, but because this was part of the original characterization, it's still an 100% Dracula performance. The wine line was written just for the movie, but it's become such a fan favorite that most later Dracula movies have included it. Gloria Holden says it in Dracula's Daughter, and in the 1970s, when they revived Dracula on Broadway, they added it to the script.
During the course of conversation, Renfield accidentally cuts himself on a paperclip. And Carl Freund, the cinematographer, does a tracking shot towards Dracula, as if he instantly becomes aware of it, like a shark smelling blood in the water. His eyes become even more intense than they were before. He forgets his plan and pretense and goes into hunt mode.
And a man who lived after death, lived on human blood.
His movement and speech suggest the undead, but it's his eyes that reveal his desire and need for blood. Christopher Lee was like a wild animal. Frank Langella was the romantic figure. Bela has those aspects. But the focus is on being a pure vampire, and you especially see it in his close-ups. They are so spooky. Then Renfield's cross, the one that the innkeeper's wife gave him, accidentally falls out.
I hope you will find this comfortable.
Thanks, it looks very inviting. Ouch! Oh, it's nothing serious. It's just a small cut from that paperclip. It's just a scratch. Renfield naively thinks that Dracula is afraid of the sight of blood and smiles as if it's kind of cute, which is funny, but also tells us how kind and understanding he is, which gives us more sympathy for him. According to J. Gordon Melton, who wrote the vampire book, the idea of vampires being repelled by the cross was actually made up by Bram Stoker, who wrote the book Dracula. But it's such a pure belief of good versus evil that to me it feels like real folklore. Especially the way Bela just automatically reacts, like, ah, where it's more of a reflex than a human fear.
Then, Dracula slips Renfield a Mickey and leaves.
Good night, Mr. Renfield.
Only Bela Lugosi can make such a pleasant phrase sound so evil. Renfield passes out, and Dracula's brides come in with the intention of drinking his blood. But Dracula gestures them away, making Renfield his first on-screen bite. This was one of Bram Stoker's earliest ideas for Dracula. Now in the book, there's dialogue between Dracula and his brides, but in the movie it's totally silent, which is more eerie and makes more sense, because Dracula has hypnotic control, so he doesn't have to say anything, and they're not going to interact in a human way. As I talked about in my last video, Todd Browning is filming the supernatural in an unflashy way to make it seem more real. It was written about in the ads too. So realistic, so blunt, so daring, and so uncompromising.
So it's mostly done in one long shot. There are no close-ups or anything. There's no dialogue, and there's no music. Sound movies didn't have background music yet. So it doesn't feel cinematic. It doesn't feel like a movie. And with Bela's spooky performance, all the fog, and the way the brides have a ghostly quality with their pale skin, long white dresses, and the way they move with sort of a glide, it feels more like you're watching a haunted occurrence unfold, as if you're watching ghosts in a haunted house. It just has an air of the supernatural. Then Dracula moves towards Renfield, and you'll notice that Bela Lugosi has a signature biting style. There's this strange, slow grace to his movement, as if it's more of a ritual than an emotionally conscious choice, because remember, he's not alive. And his hand is clawed out like this.
This could be in case there's any resistance, he could choke them, but also as a way of keeping his victims under his hypnotic spell. And with his thin, white, skeletal fingers, it's like the literal touch of death. Now, makeup artist Jack Pierce wanted Bela to wear fangs, but Bela, who didn't wear them on Broadway, said no. And because his greatest strength is making you believe he is Count Dracula with his acting alone, artificial fangs might have spoiled it. Most movie vampires that try to fit into normal society usually only wear fangs during biting scenes, which is sort of ridiculous. But with Bela, you never get a good look at his teeth, which makes him more mysterious. He could have fangs, you just don't see them. Some viewers don't even realize it, so they're imagining that they're there, which is always going to be spookier than actually seeing it.
Dracula moves closer and closer, with Renfield unconscious. And before the actual bite, because remember, there is no hope, the scene fades to black, as if Renfield is engulfed in death. But as we'll find out, his fate is much worse. So the suspense and spooky atmosphere just build into this incredibly haunting and gothic moment. The dark lighting and the black and white just add to that ghostly quality. Color would feel too much alive. I also love how it's silent. You know, silent movies had a live organist, and it didn't take long for sound movies to have background music. So having something be totally silent is very weird and unsettling, because we associate silence with death. Dead silent, quiet as a tomb. So this is perfect for Dracula, because these are living, breathing, dead people.
Carl Laemmle Jr., who was the head of production at Universal, was opposed to this, and said that Dracula should only go for women and not men. And if you view the bite as a metaphor for sex, which is a valid interpretation, you could view this scene as homoerotic. But the way their relationship plays out, with Renfield being his slave, I think it's just as valid to view it at face value. There is some debate if this image of Dracula preparing the 3 boxes is from a deleted shot, or if it's just a publicity photo. And as groovy as it would be to find extra footage, they do such a fantastic job of condensing the early chapters of the book that I'm happy just the way it is. Now in 1999, Universal did prepare an alternative version of Dracula with background music by Philip Glass, but at least for this scene, I think the original is spookier.
Most people consider the last scene, I am Dracula, in this scene to be the best and spookiest part of the movie, and I agree. But I find that true of most Dracula movies, and of the book, because how do you top the atmosphere of being inside Dracula's castle? Especially when you have the best and most believable Count Dracula, the best Renfield, or Jonathan Harker, depending on how you tell the story, and I think the most imposing and spookiest castle set. It's some of the creepiest and most atmospheric 9 minutes the classic horror has to offer, and everything in it is just so iconic. Now, nothing that comes after quite lives up to it, but what could? But don't let that deter you, because there's still plenty of groovy things yet to come, as we'll find out in Scene 6, Bound for England. Until then, toodaloo!